Federal judge says he'll decide soon on Jeffrey Clark's bid to move his Georgia criminal case to federal court. Clark is a former senior Trump Justice Department official and one of the ex-president's 18 co-defendants indicted for allegedly trying to subvert the state's 2020 presidential election results. CNN's Sarah Murray is following the proceedings for us. She's joining us right now. Did the judge seem inclined, Sarah, based on what you saw and heard, to actually go ahead and move this case?
Well, he seemed pretty skeptical of the arguments from Jeff Clark's team, which again had to make the case that everything Clark was doing was related to his role as a Justice Department official at the time. You know, he challenged Clark's attorney on why Clark was still circulating these claims of election fraud that his bosses had said were bogus in these draft memos to Georgia officials. It may have also, frankly, hurt Clark that he didn't show up in person for this hearing. He submitted a sworn statement that the judge refused to accept into evidence because, of course, prosecutors can't cross-examine a sworn statement. So that came up. Look, this is interesting to see what happens for Jeff Clark, but it's also interesting because we want to know what's going to happen to Donald Trump in this case. And Trump's attorneys have signaled that it's possible they will try to move his case to federal court as well. They haven't done that yet, but we know that they've been watching this closely. They were in the courtroom again today. At one point, our team that was in the courtroom even overheard one of Trump's attorneys seeming to opine that things were not going well for Jeffrey Clark. So it's clear they want to learn what they can from the Trump co-defendants before they make their own move to try to move to federal court if they do that. So we'll see if Clark prevails, and we'll see what happens with Trump.
The process continues. Sarah, thank you very much for that report. For more right now, I'm joined by our senior legal analyst, Elie Honig, and CNN senior law enforcement analyst, Andrew McCabe. Elie, Donald Trump gave an interview to NBC News yesterday where he was very revealing about the decision to falsely claim the 2020 election was stolen. Watch this and listen.
Were you listening to your lawyer's advice, or were you listening to your own instincts?
I was listening to different people, and when I added it all up, the election was rigged.
Were you calling the shots, though, Mr. President, ultimately?
As to whether or not I believed it was rigged, oh, sure.
Okay.
It was my decision.
So is this statement from Trump something that potentially could be very useful to prosecutors?
Sure, Wolf. I think Donald Trump makes some fundamental concessions here the prosecutors are going to be very interested in. In that clip, he acknowledges, first of all, that it was his decision to move forward with this, and second of all, that his intent was actually to overturn the results of the election. Now, the rest of this is sort of consistent with what we expect to see in terms of Donald Trump's defense. He says, look, I was getting certain piece of advice from some advisors, contradictory advice from other advisors. Ultimately, I relied on my gut. But every time Donald Trump speaks in public, that's fair game for prosecutors. I guarantee you they're watching and taking notes.
I suspect you're absolutely right. Andrew, do you see this as potentially an admission from Trump?
Well, I don't know if it's an admission of any specific illegal act, but it certainly goes to his acceptance of responsibility for making the decisions that ultimately led to this effort to try to overturn the election. It's also kind of consistent with the defense that we've heard his team float in the past, which is basically the I meant well defense. I really believed it, and therefore I was doing all these things under pursuant to my genuine belief that the election had been stolen. However, we know that that's not actually a legal defense. If you commit violations of criminal law with the best intention, they're still violations of criminal law. So all he had to intend, that mental state that the prosecutors have to prove, is that he intended to do these acts. And I think this statement certainly adds to that argument.
I suspect you're right as well. Elie, Mark Meadows, who was Trump's White House chief of staff, already lost his attempt to move his case to federal court. Given that, does Jeffrey Clark have a realistic chance of getting his case moved from state to federal court?
Well, if I think Jeffrey Clark has an extraordinarily weak and problematic argument here. Essentially, Jeffrey Clark has to prove that he was acting within his scope as a senior DOJ official. But the job of any DOJ official is to investigate in good faith, find facts, and act accordingly. What Jeffrey Clark did is the opposite of that. He drafted a letter that he wanted DOJ to send out to various states saying, we found evidence of substantial fraud. That is a complete fabrication by Jeffrey Clark. So if indeed he was acting within his scope when he made up those facts and tried to get states to act on it, then that's a very dark day for DOJ, and heaven help us all. And I think Jeffrey Clark is going to lose this motion.
In a related development, Andrew, the judge in the federal election subversion case is weighing placing a limited gag order on Trump. Trump posted in response, and I'm quoting him now, "I'm campaigning for president against an incompetent person who has weaponized the Department of Justice and FBI to go after his political opponent. And I am not allowed to comment? They leak, lie, and sue, and they won't allow me to speak?" Andrew, how does the judge weigh these competing concerns?
Well, I've often said that Donald Trump is a guy who never met a line that he didn't cross. And here we have yet another example of Trump's public statements, basically doing exactly what the prosecutors were complaining about in their motion requesting that limited gag order, as it's been referred to. So I really think that he's pushing the resolution of this motion in a very dangerous direction for him. I think it's likely that the judge is going to impose some restrictions on his public speech, and then he'll run right past that once again.